Yeah, we see the Attorney General of California being a huge position. You know, the office is always at the forefront of big issues that really affect people's lives, especially in the state of California, especially in a year like 2018. The federal Justice Department is openly hostile to many state policies, and we just like your thoughts on a few of these issues. So I guess we'll start with immigration reform.
So I believe very strongly that as a nation of immigrants, and think about it, other than Native Americans and African Americans who were brought here in chains, each and every one of our forebears is an immigrant. You don't have to go very far back in my family history, a couple generations. There was Gomer Jones who came over from Wales. He was a coal miner. He didn't have any documentation. He wasn't conferred citizenship. He just came over in a boat and made his way to the western hills of Pennsylvania and mined coal. And eventually, decades later, was conferred citizenship. One of our most prized family mementos are his citizenship papers. And my wife's family, Kim Flores, you don't have to go back many generations to find members of her family immigrated here. Each and every one of us can point back to people that immigrated here, usually in an undocumented way without having been conferred permission to do so. So now for the Trump administration to say, well, in this generation, because people are coming from Central American and South American countries because of the color of their skin, we're not going to let them in, to me is outrageous. So I think immigrants ought to have a path to citizenship. I believe the Dreamers ought to be permitted to stay here. I think there ought to be a clean renewal of DACA. And I'll do everything within my power as Attorney General to protect immigrants. And that includes defending our sanctuary city and sanctuary state laws. As Insurance Commissioner, I mentioned a moment ago, I lead a law enforcement agency. I have law enforcement personnel who work for me. I didn't wait for the passage of SB 54, the sanctuary city, sanctuary state legislation to pass. I instructed them even before passage that we're not going to cooperate with ICE in the deportation of people whose only crime is having come here without documentation. And so as Attorney General, I'll do everything I can to defend our immigrant community.
Well, Dave, let me ask you to clarify that a little bit, if I could, because recently there's been a very interesting controversy down in Orange County about some local communities who are basically fighting California as individual communities and saying that they don't want to support these sanctuary laws here in the state. So the argument they're making is, well, California is ignoring a federal statute. Why should we not be able to ignore a state statute? Well, how would you respond to that?
Well, California is not ignoring a federal statute. What we're saying is that, to the contrary, immigration is the province of the federal government, but we as a state, whether it's our state law enforcement or local law enforcement that are extensions of the state, are not going to perform the federal government's job for it. And that particularly applies where we're not talking about violent felons. The SB 54 was drafted in a way to make clear that state and local law enforcement will continue to cooperate with ICE with regard to violent felons. But with regard to people whose only crime is having come here without documentation, we're not going to do the job of the federal government and participate in sweeps and roundups and mass deportations of people who are our neighbors, people who are our colleagues, people whose kids go to the same school as our kids. We're just not going to do it. And that's entirely within the province of the state under the 10th Amendment, which reserves all powers not expressly identified in the Constitution or in federal statute to the states. So yes, there are some local governments in Southern California who want to challenge that, and they have the right to file a lawsuit. I don't think they're going to prevail. But until a court says otherwise, SB 54 is the law, and I'm confident we'll enforce it.